Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. Good morning, everyone. It's past 10 o'clock already. So my sincere thanks to the senators present and to all our resource persons present here in our hearing of the Committee on Foreign Relations. Today we will be deliberating on the following resolutions. We have proposed Senate Resolution number 299, filed by Senator Marcos, calling for the urgent review of EDCA. Senate Resolution number 303, filed by Senator Binay, calling for an inquiry on the implication of the termination of the RP-US Visiting Forces Agreement. Resolution number 306, filed by Senator Marcos, calling for the urgent review of the implementation of the Philippine-US VFA. Resolution number 305, filed by Minority Leader Senator Drilon, expressing the sense of the Senate that termination or withdrawal from treaties should also have Senate concurrence. And then just recently, which we included in our agenda, Resolution number 312, filed by the Senate President, the Minority Leader, and Senator Lacson, expressing the sense of the Senate for the President to reconsider his plan to withdraw from the US VFA. So I hope our resource persons have gone over the 5 documents now. So in short, we will discuss the current issues pertaining to the VFA between the Philippines and the United States, including the related agreements we have with the United States, which are the MDT and the EDCA. I'm sure in the course of the discussion, there will be no avoiding the mention of the 2 other agreements. This is not the first time that the President expressed his plan to abrogate the VFA, as far as I know. In 2016, he also had this pronouncement when the U.S. did not renew the grant from the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Okay. So, and this is not to forget that there have been many calls for the scrapping of the VFA since it was passed more than 20 years ago. The late Senator Miriam Santiago, my law professor, has been urging the Philippine government to renegotiate or abrogate the VFA. In the Senate and the House, various resolutions have been filed through the years calling for the renegotiation or termination of this agreement. So the objectives of this hearing, as far as the chair is concerned, are as follows. 1, to review the status of the implementation of the VFA and the EDCA. Number 2, determine the implication of the termination of the RP-US VFA. Number 3, to determine whether concurrence by the Senate should be required before the termination of or withdrawal from treaties and international agreements can be valid and effective. And number 4, to determine whether we should urge the President to reconsider his plan to withdraw from the VFA with the U.S. So we should ask, after almost 21 years that the VFA has been in operation, did it or has it actually served the interest of the Philippines? What is the national interest of the Philippines being served by the RP-US VFA? If we will recall, the main points of consideration then, when VFA was still under consideration, on whether or not to approve the VFA, were anchored on sovereignty, criminal jurisdiction, and civil liability of the U.S. military personnel, entry of nuclear weapons and other armaments of mass destruction, environment, and the issue on whether the VFA is a prelude to a basis agreement or an access arrangement for prepositioned U.S. military supplies and equipment, where the promises and assurances made by the Philippine and U.S. governments to allay the fears of our people kept. Did the VFA enhance our political, economic, and security partnership and cooperation with the United States? Did the VFA help promote the development of our country and improve the lives of our people? And in the light of the President's pronouncement regarding the abrogation of the VFA, what do we stand to lose when we do it? So to answer these questions, we have invited very important resource persons from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Department of National Defense, even the Department of Justice is here, National Security Council. We have the Presidential Commission on the Visiting Forces Agreement, the Academe, and even NEDA, and I think even a private organization here on an NGO have been invited. So let me thank the Minority Leader, Senator Drilon, for being here, and the Vice Chairman of the committee, Senator Francis Tolentino, for also being here and being early. So at this point, may I ask the committee secretary to name for the record the resource persons that we have here with us. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Good morning, Honorable Senators, Mr. Chairperson. For today, we have from the Department of Foreign Affairs, led by Secretary Teodoro L. Locsin, Jr. Good morning, sir. With him are Undersecretary Eduardo Malaya, Undersecretary Enrique Manalo, Assistant Secretary Hani Isleta, and Assistant Secretary Igor Bailen. From the Department of National Defense, we have Secretary Delphine N. Lorenzana. Good morning, sir. And with him is Undersecretary Cesar Villano. From the Department of Justice, the Secretary is represented here by Undersecretary Mark Perete. Good morning, sir. And from the NEDA, we have OIC Assistant Director Martha Flores. From the National Security Council, we have with us today Secretary Hermogenes C. Esperon, Jr. Good morning, sir. And with him are Assistant Director General Carmina Acuña, Director Manuel Jose Maria P. Tuazon. From the Armed Forces of the Philippines, we have Lieutenant General Gilbert Gapay. We have Rear Admiral Giovanni Carlo Bacordo of the Philippine Navy. And we have Major General Allen Paredes of the Philippine Air Force. From the Presidential Commission on the Visiting Forces, we have here the Undersecretary of the PCVF, Pedro Cesar C. Rambuanga, Jr. Good morning, sir. And with him are Ms. Maureen P. Gatdula and Ms. Lance Justine R. Calub. I'm sorry. And the Chief of Staff of the AFP, sir, from General Filimon Santos is also here. Thank you very much, Your Honor. The people from the Academe are, I think, on their way. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you to all our resource persons. As the author of two of the bills and measures under consideration, so the Minority Leader would like to give his opening statement. So Senator Drilon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. In our system of governance, the Senate, this chamber, not the House of Representatives, is considered as the partner of the President in terms of foreign policy. Mr. Chairman, the threatened termination of the Visiting Forces Agreement highlights and validates the need for the Senate to be part of that of foreign policy formulation. It is part also of our check and balance. It is part of our exercise of that shared power insofar as foreign policy formulation is concerned. And the failure on our part to assert such role is an abdication of our ability and our authority to indulge in or to participate in foreign policy formulation. Our failure to do so will weaken the Senate. Mr. President, it is our submission that the power of the Philippines by treaty or international agreement is vested jointly by the Constitution in the President and the Senate. And once ratified and concurred in, it becomes part of the law of the land. I repeat that, Mr. President. When we ratify a treaty, the treaty becomes part of the law of the land. And therefore, it is our submission that a treaty may not be undone without the shared power that put it into effect. 14 senators, Mr. President, or Mr. Chairman, co-signed and filed in the 17th Congress PS Resolution 289, which resolution sought to express the sense of the Senate that the termination of or withdrawal from the treaties and international agreements concurred in by the Senate shall be valid and effective only upon the concurrence by the Senate. We repeat that, Mr. President, 14 senators signed this resolution in the 17th Congress, and 9 of the 14 are incumbent members of the 18th Congress, namely the Senate President Pro Tempore Ralph Recto, Majority Leader Zubiri, Senator De Lima, Francis Pangilinan, Risa Hontiveros, Panfilo Lacson, Sani Angara, and Joel Villanueva, plus this representation. Moreover, Mr. President, this and the previous Congress adopted 20 resolutions concurring in the ratification of or accession to various treaties and international agreements, which provided that the President may, with the concurrence of the Senate, withdraw from the agreement. In other words, this condition became part of the ratification of about 20 resolutions ratifying these treaties. And so that even if the proposed Senate Resolution 289 was not adopted in the previous Congress for some reason, although 14 senators concurred with it, we have since that time included in the ratification a paragraph which required that the ratification of the various treaties and international agreements which provide that the President may, with the concurrence of the Senate, withdraw from the agreement. And let me at this point express my appreciation to the chairman of the committee for including in today's hearing the proposed Senate Resolution 305, which again put on the floor the sense of the Senate Resolution, proposed Senate Resolution 289, which we filed in this, which the 14 senators concurred in the last Congress, but which was not ratified. We also thank the chair for putting on the agenda proposed resolution number 312, which called on the President to reconsider his planned abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement in the meantime that the Senate is conducting a review and impact assessment. Again, this validates the role of the Senate that in the abrogation, termination, and withdrawal from a treaty or international agreement, the Senate must be consulted and must assert its role as the partner of the President insofar as foreign policy formulation is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Drilon. The chair recognizes the presence of Senator Poe and recognizes her to give us her opening statement.
Magandang umaga po, Mr. Chair, at sa lahat ng ating mga panauhin ngayon. It is our constitutional duty to uphold the principles of separation of powers, especially checks and balances. This gave rise for Senate action on treaties. Hindi natin ito pribilehiyo lang. Tungkulin nating busisiin ang mga treaty na pinapasok at inaalisan ng Pilipinas. In the fulfillment of this duty, we need to evaluate the Visiting Forces Agreement beyond the political noise and assess it on its own merit. Sa loob ng mahigit 2 dekada ng VFA, nakabuti ba sa atin ito? Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, who was former chairperson of the Legislative Oversight Committee on the VFA and a world international law expert, reminded the Senate body over and over again to assert its position that the Philippine government must renegotiate or abrogate the VFA. Over the years, Senator Miriam passionately argued in favor of Philippine sovereignty as well as the rights and dignity of its citizens, which she said, and I quote, suffered immensely due to the lopsided provisions. Hindi naman natin sinasabing walang benepisyo ito sa atin, pero pwedeng talakayin kung ano ang kinabuti natin dito at kung ano naman ang pwede pa nating igiit sa kanila. If we are to withdraw from any bilateral agreement, let it be with basis. If we are to concur on any executive action, let it be ultimately for the interest of the people. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Poe. So, at this point, I will now recognize the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Secretary Locsin, please.
Senator Aquilino Pimentel III, Chairman, Senate Minority Leader Franklin Drilon, Senators Poe and Tolentino, members of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, colleagues in government, friends, good morning. I wish to first of all thank the Chair and the honorable members of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations for the invitation to discuss with you our defense and security arrangements with the U.S., specifically the Visiting Forces Agreement. We welcome this opportunity to get a sense of the legislative branch's views on the matter and its attendant issues, as we also welcome inputs from other stakeholders. We would have wished to respectfully request that in making this presentation, the committee go on executive session, owing to the highly sensitive nature of the topics to be discussed. But we in the Department of Foreign Affairs are fine with any arrangement. My colleagues in the cabinet, however, who are in charge of the nuts and bolts of the national defense may wish to have an executive session, and I hope they are accommodated. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me proceed. My presentation this morning will focus primarily on the Visiting Forces Agreement. It will also tangentially touch on other Philippine-U.S. defense security-related agreements, such as the Mutual Defense Treaty and the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. The flow of presentation will cover the following: the direct and indirect benefits derived from the VFA, and 2, a preliminary impact assessment of an abrogation of the VFA given the benefits identified. Note, the DFA is not proffering any options at this point, as it chooses to also take into account the views of the legislative branch and other quarters of society before doing so. Not to mention the Department of National Defense, which is at the forefront of the issue, because this is about national security, the highest object of foreign and domestic policy. I have repeatedly said that foreign affairs in my watch is the fist in the iron glove of the armed forces. You will listen to other views on how and whether to continue the VFA. The option for the Philippines to terminate the VFA is an exercise of sovereignty. The termination of the VFA may facilitate closer relations with non-traditional partners, such as ideally far Russia, a power like the US too far to meddle in our internal affairs without any acquisitive interest in our territory, yet strong and with a long enough reach to hit a common enemy in the mutual defense. In the matter of national defense, closer relations cannot ever encompass a military alliance with a near power, because that is illogical, impractical, self-defeating, and an invitation to foreign aggression. However, the termination of the VFA must be weighed in terms of the overall national interest of the country. We have listed 4 areas where the direct benefits derived from the VFA are most manifest. Clearly, these will be in respect of Philippine defense, military, and security arrangements. Number 1, the VFA ensures operability of other Philippines-U.S. defense agreements and modalities of cooperation. Other Philippines-U.S. agreements and modalities of defense and security cooperation may be rendered inoperative despite remaining legally valid. Some of these agreements and modalities of cooperation include the Mutual Defense Treaty, which the VFA serves, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which gives substance to the commitments of the MDT, the Mutual Logistics Support Agreement, and the Mutual Defense Board Security Engagement Board approved joint exercises on combating traditional and non-traditional security threats, which is to say Islamic terrorists, with which we can never be at peace. For the MDT, the VFA is the substance that makes it real and makes it work. The EDCA, on the other hand, is hinged on the VFA. There would essentially be no practical use for an EDCA in the absence of the VFA, which is the legal framework for the presence of U.S. military personnel in military exercises and actual military responses under the MDT. Without them, the MDT is just a piece of paper. There is contrary views to this. The VFA, number 2, the VFA allows the U.S. to provide a total package approach on defense articles that would be compatible with equipment assets and systems that are already in place. There are again different views on this. But current military equipment, assets, and systems are largely patterned from and or provided by the U.S. Through the years, the requirements for AFP modernization were addressed by the incremental procurement of defense articles that the Philippines has made after due diligence undertaken by relevant Philippines government agencies, specifically the Department of National Defense. The dollar amount for security assistance, security cooperation programs obtained from the U.S. for the period 2016 to 2019 totals U.S. $554.55 million. This includes U.S. $267.75 million in foreign military financing for the procurement of defense articles for the same period. In addition, under the VFA, the Philippines is able to receive after-sales servicing in the form of maintenance packages that increase the article's value and lifespan. The U.S. plans to spend over $200 million in 2020-2021, providing aircraft, training, equipment, and construction for the AFP, and more than U.S. $45 million in FMF. Without the VFA, the U.S. Departments of State and Defense will be hard put to get funds from the U.S. Congress for FMF and other defense assistance programs of the Philippines. To the Philippines. 3, the VFA promotes interoperability between the Philippines forces and law enforcement agencies and their U.S. counterparts. Again, you will listen to contrary views. But for now, the Mutual Defense Board Security Engagement Board have approved joint activities between the militaries and law enforcement agencies of both countries through the years. The termination of the VFA may impact the upcoming fiscal year 2020 activities, which the Philippines military and law enforcement agencies need to enhance their capabilities in countering threats to national security. There are some 319 activities lined up for this year. The absence of a VFA would result in a severe curtailment of defense engagements with the Philippines and the cancellation of cooperative defense activities in the Philippines, as it provides the legal framework for the presence of U.S. forces in the Philippines. The U.S. will not operate without a VFA. 4, the VFA allows for continued support for addressing non-traditional security threats. Through the VFA, U.S. forces have been instrumental in assisting the Philippines to combat non-traditional security threats such as trafficking in persons, cyber attacks, terrorism, and illegal narcotics through trainings, joint exercises, and exchange visits. The U.S. has also provided support for humanitarian assistance and disaster response, as well as search and rescue operations. Disaster response is more than humanitarian in purpose. The new military doctrine assumes that developments in modern warfare partake in destructiveness of the nature of natural calamities like typhoons and earthquakes. So disaster response to natural or military-inflicted calamities must be in the same scale. U.S. assistance on counterterrorism, especially on intelligence and capability building, have proven to be vital. This support was crucial in enabling the Philippine security forces to prevail in the Battle of Marawi in 2017. Recently, the U.S. Department of Defense support has enabled continued AFP operations to degrade ISIS, East Asia-aligned militants in southern Philippines, as well as several successful operations to rescue British and Indonesian citizens taken hostage by the Abu Sayyaf group. Curtailment of the Department of Defense support resulting from a terminated VFA would diminish the AFP's immediate capabilities to degrade and deter terrorism and respond to terrorist emergencies. There may be new developments on this, contrary to this view. On the other hand, Mr. Chairman, the following is an enumeration of 6 areas where the indirect benefits of continuing the VFA are manifest, or put differently, may be put at risk should the VFA be terminated. Number 1, the Philippines' international standing as viewed by other U.S. allied countries is maintained. While the VFA is a bilateral agreement between the Philippines and the U.S., there may be repercussions in the way other U.S. allied and or U.S. friendly countries, exemplary Russia, Japan, Australia, South Korea, Singapore, and Israel, perceive and or conduct their foreign relations with the Philippines should it be decided that the agreement be terminated. Philippine credibility to deliver on mutual military arrangements to maintain peace and stability in the region depend as much, if not more, on our American alliance. Behind us is a sense of American support. 2, recent actions by the U.S. have shown its renewed commitment to its defense obligations to the Philippines through the pronouncements of Secretary of State Michael R. Pompeo and Secretary of Defense Mark T. Esper during their visits to Manila in 2019. In addition, in the fiscal year 2020 U.S. National Defense Authorization Act, signed into law on 20 December 2019, the U.S. Congress has tasked both the Secretaries of State and Defense to submit a report on a strategy to preserve and strengthen Philippines-U.S. military alliance, including appropriate support to enhance Philippines' defense capabilities, particularly in the seas. This derives from the provision of the NDAA, which states, and I quote, "An armed attack on the armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft of the Republic of the Philippines in the Pacific, including the South China Sea, would trigger the mutual defense obligations of the United States under Article 4 of the Mutual Defense Treaty." Close quotes. This is an unequivocal commitment that had been conveyed mainly verbally in the past. It is now in writing. In short, in a military engagement, the sinking of a Philippine vessel triggers an American response. The regular presence of U.S. forces, including those conducting freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, including the West Philippine Sea, serve as a deterrent to aggressive actions in the West Philippine Sea. Corollarily, the MDT is a deterrent to any attack from any power. The termination of the VFA will very likely dilute the U.S. commitment to the MDT. 3, the existing goodwill and friendly relations between the Philippines and the U.S. may be compromised. The historically robust and friendly relations between the Philippines and the U.S. are further strengthened by the high level of trust and confidence between the Philippines and the United States. With the termination of the VFA, overall relations may be adversely affected, and various areas of bilateral and multilateral involving both countries' cooperation may be put in jeopardy. In this regard, it may be recalled that President Donald J. Trump, just a year into his presidency, showed special preference to the Philippines by coming to Manila for the ASEAN Summit in 2017. This led to the country's highly successful hosting of that event. President Trump has not attended any ASEAN summits since, those hosted by Singapore in 2018 and Thailand in 2019. 4, Philippine-U.S. robust economic relations may be affected. The U.S. is the Philippines' third largest trading partner at U.S. $18.70 billion, registered in 2018, and our biggest export market and our 4th largest import source. The Philippines also enjoys preferential treatment on its exports to the U.S. as a beneficiary of the U.S. generalized system of preferences, and will continue to be such until December 31, 2020. The GSP was reauthorized on 23 March 2018 after U.S. President Donald Trump signed the omnibus spending bill, which included GSP renewal language. Our GSP exports account for 16% of our total exports to the U.S., valued at an estimated $1.7 billion in 2018. It may be noted also that the Philippines currently enjoys a trade surplus with the U.S., with our exports outpacing our imports by as much as US $371.98 million as of June 2019. 5, the healthy state of our bilateral trade, investments, and tourism may be imperiled. The U.S. is the Philippines' 5th largest source of investments, accounting for some $12.9 billion in 2018. The U.S. is also the Philippines' 3rd largest tourism market, with over 1 million tourist arrivals in 2018. Finally, in respect of official development assistance, ODA, the U.S. is the largest source of grants. There are no loans, accounting for 36.89% share of total grants in 2018 at US $886.47 million. 6, U.S. assistance facilitated by the VFA may dry up. From 2016 to 2019, the U.S. provided substantial development assistance in the amount of US $336.306 million, or a total of $16.8 billion. This amount funded programs for scholarships and seminars, and projects on education, health, environment, agriculture, fisheries, trade, labor, and governance. This brings total U.S. assistance to the Philippines for the same period to US $904.93 million. Let me conclude with some basic and incontrovertible facts and principles valid at all times and in all places in the conduct of foreign affairs. Number 1, a mutual defense treaty is a promise and a threat. It is a mutual promise by 2 countries to defend one another from attack as if that attack were made on the other. 2, as a promise, the MDT is only as good as its performance or delivery when it is triggered. The poet Robert Frost said, "The afternoon knows what the morning never suspected." We will not know how real it is until we or the U.S. is attacked. Then we must, as we should, declare and make war on its attacker, whatever the cost to us. Failure forfeits our claim to be a real sovereign state, whose word is its bond. This is called prestige in international relations. In a mutual defense arrangement, no one counts the cost of performance because, while it exists, both parties draw down on its main benefit. And what is that benefit? It is deterrence. The geographical proximity of the Philippines to the most likely aggressor against the U.S. or against the Philippines, given the MDT and its supportive arrangements in EDCA and the VFA, is a severe deterrent. That proximity means the response will be near instantaneous. In mutual defense, there is to be no second thought, nor any second wasted in response. In warfare, time is power and money. Hence, while the Mutual Defense Treaty abides, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement was adopted to shorten the response time by pre-positioning military assets closer to the possible threat of war, so as to reduce the cost of keeping the mutual defense vibrant and effective. No, pre-positioning is not a violation of sovereignty, but an upholding of sovereignty. Without pre-positioning, our sovereignty is at risk. Under EDCA, we have given the U.S. 5 access locations in the Philippines. The U.S. has developed 1. No one can say the U.S. is hungry to stretch the extent and duration of its passing and never permanent, but always necessary presence in the Philippines. Concomitant with the EDCA is the Visiting Forces Agreement, which provides a template governing the behavior of U.S. military personnel while they are in the Philippines on a visit for, say, joint military exercises. We have a similar agreement with Australia. We might have one with Japan. It has been proposed to abrogate the VFA with the U.S. It has also been said that the Mutual Defense Treaty and presumably the EDCA are to remain in place. That is not entirely up to us. The U.S. may see no need to continue with EDCA without the VFA because its military capability depends on human operators whose behavior need to be regulated, such as how they are to be dealt with when and if they commit crimes. The Mutual Defense Treaty without the VFA and EDCA may be compared to a deflated balloon. For all practical purposes, it becomes an extra-large rubber for an Asian, far more elastic than he can ever need for its purpose, and more suitable as a shower cap than a prophylactic against foreign aggression. Can any other power or powers replace the U.S.? It is rationally inconceivable to have a mutual defense treaty with any military power except one that is too far to meddle in one's internal affairs, but with a strong and long enough reach to hit the mutual enemy. Thus, logically, we can only have a military alliance with Russia in the far north and the United States in the far east across the Pacific. But Russia does not want to take on the U.S., nor does China, as Foreign Minister Wang Yi told our president. While the Philippines has the prerogative to terminate the VFA anytime, the continuance of the agreement is deemed to be more beneficial to the Philippines compared to any benefits were it to be terminated. Terminating the VFA will negatively impact the Philippines' defense and security arrangements, as well as the overall bilateral relations of the Philippines with the U.S., and perhaps even on the sub-regional and multilateral level. Our contribution to regional defense is anchored on our military alliance with the world's last superpower. There are, of course, irritants which need to be addressed, but the DFA has taken steps to clarify with the U.S. certain items pertaining to the VFA to avoid any issues in the implementation of the agreement. However, it must be said that the VFA is the logical target when the country's sovereign justice system, modeled after the American system no less, is disrespected. When U.S. senators demean the Philippine justice system, which is the mirror image of the United States, by demanding the release of an accused properly charged by 2 rulings of our Supreme Court, it insulted the most basic aspect of sovereignty, the monopoly on justice within its territory. On top of which, the U.S. senators insulted their own justice system, after which ours is faithfully modeled. Therefore, there is value in revisiting the VFA to address issues of sovereignty such as jurisdiction and custody. An early resumption of bilateral clarificatory talks should serve as a basis as well as a jump-off point for a review of the VFA. At this point, we would like to open ourselves to questions from the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The Chair notes and welcomes the presence of Senators Marcos and Gordon. So maybe we can proceed to hear the other resource persons here. You have? Okay, but the Vice Chair has questions for the Secretary. Please, Senator
Yes,
Tolentino.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 2 quick answers from the good Secretary. From your concluding remarks, it would appear that you are for a review, not a termination. Is that your personal view or the department's position right now, Mr. Secretary?
As I said at the beginning, the DFA at this point proffers no preference for any of these options. But at this point, I think that a vigorous review of the Visiting Forces Agreement is called for.
And just a reality check, Mr. Secretary. Under Section 9 of the VFA, there is a need to utilize that 180 days notice before a party desires to terminate the agreement. Have we done this, or has any action been
No,
initiated by the DFA?
Your Honor, we have not yet sent notice of termination, but we are prepared to do so.
Mr. Chair, it would appear from your presentation that the viability of the EDCA will rest on the effectivity, the duration of the VFA, even though EDCA will have its own lifespan expiring on 2024, if I'm not mistaken. So are you saying that with a proposed termination of the VFA, it goes without saying that the EDCA will likewise die as a treaty as well, as an agreement as well?
It is our estimation, our own view, that abrogating the VFA without any attempt to review it to strengthen the sovereignty provisions in favor of the Philippines, yes, that the United States may lose interest. There are neighboring countries that are offering the same access, in fact, with greater military capabilities of a domestic nature.
And with that, one last follow-up. With that goes as well the exchange of notes, perhaps to include the Romulo-Kenny exchange of notes after the agreement was signed by President Clinton. All the exchange of notes would be invalid as well. Is that the presumption, Mr. Secretary?
Again?
There were exchange of notes,
yes,
on a diplomatic basis by Ambassador Kenny and a former DFA Secretary Bert Romulo.
That's right.
It follows that all of this would be invalidated as well.
I'm saying that that possibility is there. It's not so much invalidated as finally ignored and abandoned by the United States if it loses interest in a mutual defense arrangement, which the VFA and the EDCA give substance to.
But finally, last question, Mr. Chair. It does not preclude the good secretary, the DFA secretary, from having his own exchange of notes with the current U.S. ambassador to put some flesh and meat and substance into the MDT agreement. Is that also correct legally?
Well, legally? Yes, legally, and I thank you so much for that suggestion. It had not even occurred to us.
So we can
So
probably have
if it comes to that, I certainly will make every effort to try to save the Mutual Defense Treaty, because without it, I believe our sovereignty, far from being compromised, is in severe danger from foreign aggression.
So you're probably now contemplating a Kim Locsin exchange of letter.
Thanks to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, since we have started questioning the secretary, I can no longer prevent the additional question. So the minority leader wants to ask a question of the secretary, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On January 23, the President said he is giving the United States 30 days to correct what was done on the visa of our colleague, Senator Bato. Now, he says 30 days, and that 30 days would expire in my count on February 22. And if we follow the sequence, the termination must be sent by February 22. Is that correct, sir? Yes,
Yes, he said that.
yes. Now, and we have 180 days, as pointed out by my colleague, within which to give notice or to make the termination effective. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Now, have we sent the notice of termination?
No, I have prepared the notice of termination, but it has not been sent upon the orders of the President.
Okay, so the notice of termination has been prepared, but you are awaiting
no. Not yet.
they are awaiting the instructions of the President.
And I
It was
yes.
prepared.
Yes,
Since
I prepared it.
Yes, because it's
I prepared it in Washington, D.C., and I've specifically said that I will send it upon the direct personal order of the President and no one else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Now, as a legal proposition, can the EDCA exist without the VFA?
Yes.
Well, Mr. Secretary, maybe you want to review jurisprudence on that, because there are Supreme Court decisions which basically say that the EDCA can only exist with the VFA because the EDCA is merely in implementation of the VFA, and that is the rationalization for the EDCA not being ratified by the Senate, but still continues to be valid.
The way I see it, I'm afraid I can only answer from how I see it, is that the EDCA is there. It allows enhanced defense cooperation, but enhanced defense cooperation from the time when I believe both of us were engaged in this, I as a publisher and as an advisor of Corazon Aquino after the termination of the U.S. bases. The United States will not allow its personnel to be deployed to any country where there is no VFA because, well, at that time, the answer to me is that we trust the Philippine justice system. It's like ours. But you cannot say the same about other countries, and that they could be picked up by these fundamentalist countries and harmed. And that's why they will not operate without a VFA. Now, a defense capability an offensive capability of the United States continues to depend on human factors. To say it is done automatically is to dwell in science fiction. It will always have U.S. physical personnel.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In other words, what we're saying is, while the continued existence of the EDCA is legally debatable if we terminate the VFA, certainly it becomes difficult to implement what is provided in the EDCA unless we have a VFA, and that the other party, the Americans, will simply not comply or not implement the EDCA without the VFA being present.
What I'm saying is that, yes, it's true when they say that when you abrogate the VFA, the MDT can remain, and so will EDCA. But both will be nothing but pieces of paper.
So for all practical purposes, it is terminated, effectively.
Well, the paper's there.
Yeah.
I think it was a German foreign chancellor who said on the eve of World War II, when he was confronted with a treaty of mutual defense between France and Belgium, he said, "What's a treaty? It's a piece of paper."
Yes.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's a scrap of paper.
Yes. And especially if there are no implementing documents like the VFA.
Yes.
Now, I would like to repeat the question of Senator Tolentino for emphasis. You have cited, Mr. Secretary, 6 reasons and 6 areas which enumerates the benefits between the relation of our relationship with the United States under the VFA.
Yes.
And the implication of your statement is that we would be at the losing end if the VFA is terminated and lose these benefits. Do I get that correctly, sir?
If you based on what I have said, yes. Now there are, I must tell you, but it must be an executive session. Although we got this data about the benefits from previous defense departments, there are different views already about the substance of these commitments. And we will hear that, but only in executive session.
Yes, but in the meantime, we're just asking, basing our questions on what the good secretary has said in his opening statement.
That's right, because I give respect to what my predecessors have done, including the senators, including the Senate. You said that the VFA was a good thing, and you had good reasons for it. Also the EDCA, to maintain the MDT. I must pay respect to that as Foreign Affairs Secretary. Now, if there are supervening facts, we can only hear that in executive session.
I would yield at this point my
Senator Poe, I think Senator Poe wants to ask a question.
Yeah, it's not a question, Mr. Chair.
With the
It's-
permission of Senator Poe? Okay na, Senator? Okay, Senator
It's
Marcos,
just a
please.
quick manifestation to the chairman and the request that we take up the Secretary of Foreign Affairs on his offer to brief us in executive session, subject, of course, to the schedule of the Senate as well as its members.
Yes, Mr. President, if I may, Mr. Secretary, let's first listen to what they're going to say, and at a certain point, when there are questions which the resource persons feel should be answered only in the executive session, we can consider that. But I don't think it is correct that we just call for the executive session immediately. As we said, all the questions we're raising is based on the statement of the secretary.
We will use the first 2 hours for inputs, exchange of ideas, which can be stated publicly. Okay. Then over lunch we can retire to the Senate lounge there to for our executive session. Senator Poe, please.
Thank you, Secretary Locsin, for outlining the benefits as well as the possible consequences of not having the VFA. Napaka-importante na marinig nating lahat at maapaalala sa atin kung ano ang mga nagiging benepisyo nito. Kaya nga mutual benefit. I'm sure there's something in it for them as well. That's the reality. It can't be a one-sided agreement. Ang usapin kasi ngayon ay tungkol sa soberanya, di ba? Yan naman yung ating gustong matamasa. Pero hindi naman natin itong matatamasa kung hindi natin kaya ipagtanggol. At magpakatotoo na tayo, sa ating sitwasyon ngayon, kailangan natin ang mga iba't ibang mga provisyon kung tutuhanin nila itong igagalang para mapagtanggol natin ang ating sarili. Gaya nga ng sinabi mo, ang banta nariyan palagi. Pero pag nangyari na ito, kinakailangan ay meron tayong kakayanan na umaksyon. Malinaw sa sinabi ninyo na pag merong kunyaring nag-atake sa Pilipinas, katulad niyan, merong barko na sabi mo, if they sink one of our ships, that the U.S. will actually respond? Is that, I would like to clarify that.
Yes, especially with the note. Before it was just verbal, but now it's in writing that an attack on our public vessels will be a trigger for the Mutual Defense Treaty.
See, that is very crucial at this time with the threats that we are experiencing along the West Philippine Sea. And one thing that you also pointed out, which I think is very good, is the economic impact. The possible economic impact. Naturally, they won't take this sitting down if ever. There might be other consequences that might happen, and also the cybersecurity aspect that they help us with. And then I'd also like to ask Secretary Lorenzana, Secretary Lorenzana, sa inyong naging karanasan, marami bang naitulong ang mga tropa ng Amerikano dito pagdating sa panahon ng kalamidad?
Calamidad, yes, Mr. Chairman. Example is that when Haiyan struck Tacloban, it was the U.S. aircraft carrier who came first and offered assistance to those victims because we didn't have any assets then to bring there. The airport was destroyed, and it will take time for our ships to go there. That's why since then we also acquired 2 large ships that can be used in times of emergency. But yes, Mr. Chairman, they've been very helpful during calamities, especially Haiyan.
Aside from Haiyan or Yolanda, have they also been active in providing assistance during other calamities that occurred?
Sino ba? In Sogon landslide in Leyte, Mr. Chair, they also assisted us there. I think they're always there during calamities. The U.S. forces are always there, especially the troops that are deployed in Okinawa. They are ready to help us anytime we suffer some calamities.
Nakita ko rin yan sa Ondoy. Actually,
Yeah.
nandun rin sila para tumulong sa mga iba't ibang parte na naapektuhan. Sa inyong pananaw bilang sa DND, tayo ba ay mapipilayan kung pinigil nila ang assistance? Kasi nga nabanggit ni Secretary Locsin na parang meron $200 million na nakalaan ng 2020 and 2021. So does this mean that the U.S. is our strongest allies financially when it comes to assisting support for the DND?
Mr. Chairman, the U.S. has given us a total of 1.3 billion dollars since 1998, with varying amounts every year, starting 1998 with 1.5 million, then increasing. The biggest grant that they gave the AFP was in 2017 at $219 million.
So malaking tulong sa atin.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, malaki ang tulong.
So kung malaking tulong sa atin, ano naman ang benepisyo sa palagay ninyo sa kanila na meron silang kasunduan sa atin?
Can I ask the Chief of Staff to explain,
Yes,
Chair, because
yes,
they are
Chief
the
of
ones
Staff.
involved with the exercises.
Sige, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair. Actually, sir, Mr. Chair, they have also benefited from our trainings because we consider our soldiers to be expert in, especially in terrorism, what we had experienced in Marawi. Aside from our expertise we have shared to them during joint exercises, of course, they have maintained their presence in the region.
Because terrorism affects everybody globally, correct? And whether we like it or not, unfortunately, there are some that are within our territory that will be easier for them to identify. Am I correct?
Aside from of course, their technical assistance, we have ISR and some technological advancement on military equipment.
Mr. Secretary, Secretary Locsin, in the VFA agreement, is there a provision there that says at any time, any of the parties can resort to a renegotiation of the agreement?
That's implied in the agreement, and we've actually had a committee of which the executive director is here, where we will, I believe, in March, start talking to them towards with a view to renegotiations.
Okay, because there are a few items that I feel we can look into and renegotiate. For example, the unfair provision on criminal jurisdiction and custody. Airing U.S. personnel is given to U.S. authorities, whereas airing PH personnel who committed offense in the U.S. shall be taken into custody by the authorities in the U.S. Am I correct?
Yes.
So pagdating sa mga nangyayari mga kriminal na ginawa ng mga empleyado ng Amerikano, sila ang pwedeng may hawak dun sa mga may nagawang kriminal na aktibidad. Pero kung tayo ang may ginawa sa lugar nila, sila pa rin ang may hawak, hindi pwedeng tayo. Ganun po ba?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yung isa pa, military and civilian personnel are exempt from passport and visa regulations upon entering and departing the Philippines. Sila exempt. Pero tayo, the U.S. Embassy reserves the right to deny visas to persons who are ineligible for entry into the United States. Meaning, we don't have the power to determine who they bring in here, but they do have that prerogative when it comes to our own personnel going to the U.S. Is that correct?
I don't know how it is operationalized, but I can imagine this. When the visiting forces agreement is implemented, you have basically perhaps hundreds of U.S. Personnel coming in, and if you ask visas for them in the course of a joint military exercise, it's either too much trouble because they may change the personnel they are sending for that particular deployment. When it comes to Filipinos, for example, going to the United States, Filipino military personnel, not part of a military exercise, and we send them there, I guess they say, well, you're not that many, so maybe you should. But I can understand that when the review comes up, I will insist on that and see where it goes. I also think that the Americans themselves have seen that when we arrest erring American personnel on accusations of a crime, that when they are for a period of time detained by our authorities, no harm comes to them, unlike in other countries. So by now, they should be able to assess that the Philippines, with an identical justice system as the United States, possibly the only civilized system in the world, surely they can trust us by now that we will not abuse. And, ma'am, if I may add?
Yes, sir.
Now that Senator De La Rosa is here, may I say that
We were having this issue right now.
I'd like to greet him. Thank you for being here. And that any suggestion that this issue has arisen because of him is unfair. Because he has never complained about his treatment regarding the visa. He has never allowed it, just to be fair, he has never allowed it to affect his view about the need for robust Philippine-U.S. relations, and has urged our president to join the ASEAN-U.S. summit. He is a man who takes it like a man.
Yes, but Mr. Secretary, he's probably the straw that broke the camel's back. But then, again, yung sinasabi ko, ang ating pagkokonsidera nito ay para sa renegosasyon. Kung anong makakabuti para sa atin. Dahil sila din naman, they will insist on what will be beneficial for them. It's important for us to also insist on what will be good for us. Now, there's also another rule that reasonable quantities of baggage and personal effects of U.S. personnel, reasonable, may be imported and used in the Philippines free of all duties and taxes. While baggage and personal effects of Philippine personnel may be entered into the United States within 6 months of first arrival without the payment of duties and internal revenue taxes. I just want to make sure that, can you clarify this particular provision?
May I ask Undersecretary Malaya, who knows the nuts and bolts of this?
Yes, please.
Your Honor, I think you're referring to the counterpart agreement, which would cover Philippine military elements studying in the U.S. in military schools. So, or otherwise the VFA 2. You're correct in your statement. May I also add that when we requested for a reciprocal treatment or a counterpart treatment from the U.S., we in fact are the only one of 2 countries which the U.S. entered into a counterpart agreement. So when the VFA was negotiated, they in fact exercised great flexibility in just because they would like to have the VFA or the VFA 1. Certainly, the VFA 1 and the VFA 2 is nowhere near the ideal status of force agreement, just like the NATO. But I think we could be, heading to something more desirable when we have these clarificatory talks, which the Secretary had mentioned earlier.
So, in summary, Mr. Chairman, just ending my line of question for now, am I clear in my understanding that it seems to me that the panel now belonging to the executive is more for a review than a total rejection of the visiting forces agreement?
At this point, ma'am, we have to wait for what national defense and national security have to say. Our presentation is based on the assumption, which I truly believe in, that previous attempts to define this relationship, to substantiate it, were done in good faith and with the best available intelligence. It is out of respect for the Senate that I have done that. I will not dismiss the reasons that were given in the past for entering into EDCA and VFA out of hand simply because I did not belong to that administration. It was done with wisdom. And now we must listen to other evidence that might contravene that. But for the time being, it must be given respect.
Actually, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your presence here that shed a lot of clarity on some of the questions that we had. But out of your presentation earlier, I'd say 75 to 80% outlined the benefits of having this agreement. But towards the end, there was the question of sovereignty. Again, that they may have overstepped into our sovereignty, but there are many aspects in defending sovereignty. One is making a statement against the actions of another country towards us. But another thing is actually to physically defend also your country. And I think that in this other aspect, we cannot be complacent with our own military strength. We need to be able to strengthen our own AFP, our own defense, line of defense. But since at this point we are lacking, sometimes we need assistance from others. So this is where the VFA comes from. So I hope that maybe in the executive session, the military can go into detail as to their concerns with regards to the VFA agreement. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
If I may,
Yes, sir.
let me just say that no administration before this one has endeavored to build up a completely domestic and strong military defense. We have engaged with Japan, with France, with Australia to increase our naval presence, a Coast Guard presence. The deterrent value of that is that the more vessels we have out there, the more likely someone will commit a mistake and sink one of them. And the more strongly the message is sent. Hit one of us, and the entire might and power of the United States will fall upon you. And this is something no previous administration has done. They could commit aggressive acts against us because they just took reefs. But this time, because this administration has bothered to invest in the national defense, every step forward against us is a step closer to war with the United States.
So, sir, are you saying that it is in this administration that you got this agreement signed by the United States committing to defending us in case there was an actual attack?
Yes,
It is only in this administration.
that's right.
Okay.
Before
Thank you
that,
for
there
the
were
clarity.
vague discussions about attacks on the metropolitan territory, which a phrase nobody actually understood.
It was just all verbal, mostly.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Poe. The chair recognizes the presence of Senator Bato de la Rosa, as well as of Dr. Clarita Carlos, a professor of political science in the U.S. There is actually a body tasked to review the VFA. Hindi po ba? This is the, correct me if I'm wrong, the Presidential Commission on the Visiting Forces. So if there's already a body tasked to review the VFA, can we hear the report from that body if it has actually been reviewing the VFA and what is the progress or status of such a study and review?
Under the new executive order, making the DFA the chair and the Secretary of National Defense the vice chair, we had an organizational meeting 2 weeks ago, right, or a week ago. So we've just started, and now when we met, we decided that we would start clarificatory talks in, I would like to leave it to the executive director, who will be retained as the executive director.
The executive director is Undersecretary Rambuanga. Sige sir, can we hear from you? Kung wala pang actual review, what's the timetable? Or is there a plan?
Good morning, Your Honor. The Presidential Commission on Visiting Forces was purposely organized with the urging of the Senate when they concurred with the VFA ratification. And the instruction of the Senate is that for the executive to come up with a commission to look whether the activities of the visiting forces are for the national interest. So it involves respect of our rules, regulation, customs and traditions, department laws also. And in doing our job, we consulted with at least 36 agencies of the government, asking them what are the laws and regulations that should be imposed on the visiting forces. And with the assistance of our consultants, we came up with our omnibus implementing rules and regulation for the visiting forces agreement. For example, for the respect of our Professional Regulation Commission laws, visiting forces who will be coming in to exercise their professions must first pass through a special committee of the Professional Regulations Board or Commission to look into their qualifications to practice their professions here in the Philippines. Say, for example, doctors, nurses, veterinarians, engineers. So these professionals coming in with the visiting forces must be qualified by the Professional Regulations Commission. Also, for respect for the NCIP, we always joined the planning, the initial planning, mid-planning, and final planning conference of the Mutual Defense Board committees. And we tell them the do's and don'ts into operating inside ancestral lands. So the NCIP authorities in the regions, in the provinces that they want to operate are consulted, and they are given permission to do their exercises there. We recently came to know that the whole and the entire province of Batanes is a ancestral land. So recently, 2018, there is an exercise there in Batanes, and they were given the permission to exercise in Batanes.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question on the Undersecretary? Yes, one.
Sir, go ahead, sir.
Yes. Were you, was your council, or yes, was that body where you are the executive director, ever consulted on the decision to terminate the VFA or to start the process of terminating the VFA before the announcement was made?
For your information, sir, the PCBF, Presidential Commission on Visiting Forces, is chaired now by the Secretary of Foreign Affairs.
Yeah, I
The
was just
Vice
asking
Chair
the
is
question.
Secretary of National Defense.
Okay.
So my unit is only a secretariat
Okay.
catering to their.
So I guess the question should be addressed to Secretary Lorenzana or Secretary Locsin. Were you ever consulted on this termination, on this decision to terminate?
Sir, can I continue first? The review of the BFA is a collective endeavor of all the members. So we get inputs from the Department
Please
of National
answer,
Defense.
just if you know. Just very simple question. Was the body consulted before the decision to terminate or the VFA?
think we should ask the chair of
Okay,
the...
or Secretary Ronzana
Secretary Locsin
and
is the
Secretary
chair.
Locsin?
Yeah.
I was not yet chair, but I will not dodge the question. It is the prerogative of the executive, the president and commander-in-chief, to make that call. Now, having made that call in what I believe is a valid reason, the sovereign insult delivered to our justice system, which is the principal mark of a state, that they have the monopoly on to decide who is right, who is wrong when it comes to the law. On that basis, the president can fire off his desire to abrogate it. Then we come in to advise him whether it is wise or not, all things considered. But
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I do not dispute that statement, that the president is the principal actor in foreign relations. But the question that I ask is a question of fact. Were the Presidential Commission on Visiting Forces consulted, or were you consulted, or was Secretary Lorenzana consulted? I don't dispute the authority of the president, that he is a principal actor and decision maker on the matter of foreign relations. But certainly, as Secretary of National Defense and as Secretary of Foreign Affairs, it is expected that there will be consultations done. So I'm just asking a question of fact. Was there consultation done with the commission?
no, nor would I have wanted any consultations before he makes that statement. The commander-in-chief must be able to express what he wants, his displeasure at the insult delivered by a foreign power. That I would not want him to come first to me, nor do I believe the Secretary of National Defense would like. But having done that, and given the mechanism...
As we said, we do not dispute that. What we're asking is,
No,
was there
there's none.
consultation? There is none.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Yusek Rambuanga, continue with your presentation. But ang question ko lang, do you intend to come up with a written report, or are you supposed to come up with an annual written report, assessment of the VFA? Hindi po ba ganun?
Yes, sir. Our mandate is to come up with an annual report.
Kaya natin, ano sir?
As our mandate states, it is our duty to come up with an annual report,
yun.
and we're doing that.
Sige.
And we are evaluating or concluding or assessing whether the VFA is still in the interest of our
Correct. Yun na nga,
country.
that's the purpose. When was your latest annual report? So, pasubmit na lang po natin dito sa committee. Or do you have, what year was your latest annual report?
Ever since we been submitting annual reports.
So you have a 2019 annual report?
Yes.
Okay, so yun na lang po siguro. And then we expect you to come up with a 2020 annual report.
Yes, sir.
So ganun na lang po siguro. To shorten the proceedings, we will just require the executive director to submit all existing annual reports on the VFA to this committee, and as well as all future annual reports on the VFA.
Yes, sir.
Senator Gordon?
Ay, may tanong ba? Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Amy Marcos. Thank you for allowing me to ask the questions. I was going to give way to you first, especially since Senator Bato is there beside you. Let me just ask a question directly to my good friend, Foreign Secretary Terry Boy Locsin. We entered into the Visiting Forces Agreement out of need. Would that be correct?
Given the termination of the U.S. bases agreement, something that I was opposed to, and tried to stop with the help of Richard Armitage, and well, that didn't fly. Yes, but I believe it was also, initially it was ours, I think, historically, but the one who can say that are the men in the military. But from the outside, I thought it must have come from us, because having removed the U.S. bases, which is the muscle of the Mutual Defense Treaty, we thought perhaps Visiting Forces and EDCA Enhanced Cooperation Agreement would beef up whatever was left of the Mutual Defense Treaty. But later on, I must tell you this, that the Americans, when the bases issue was up for a vote in the Senate, and Armitage and I went to the Pentagon, the Americans had absolutely no interest in renewing it or retaining the U.S. bases on the ground. I believe that they had already won the Cold War decisively against communism. And that, as they told me, what's the point? I mean, how do we defend U.S. bases in the Philippines when we are closing U.S. bases in Carolina? So they were looking at it from dollars and cents. But then, since then, the fall of the Soviet Union, a new challenge has come to the world order created by the United States after World War II. And then I believe that's when they started paying attention about how do you make up for what you let slip through your fingers? And that's the VFA and the EDCA.
So indeed, we have a VFA because the reality is, prescinding from all the threats outside the country, is that we don't have a military that can defend us, an adequate military that can defend. They can defend us, but how long, for example, does the military have when you fight a war like the one fought by President Estrada? I think we ran out of bullets there, if I'm not mistaken.
I would like to refer that question to the Secretary of National Defense. Sometimes there are many stories floating out
I've only
there.
raised the question just to put it in perspective. Gusto ba itindihan ng tao ito eh? Hindi naman tayo nakikipag-agreement because gusto natin. Kailangan natin. Kung hindi natin kailangan, huwag tayo makipag-agree. Kung wala tayo ibubuga in terms of military muscle, as you say, eh, kung hindi natin kailangan ito, huwag tayo makipag-agree. But we have to be on our own, which means that I was with you. I was against the removal of bases because we were not ready. And I said our Air Force was going to be all air and no force at that time. Our Navy was going to be all coast and no guard. And that's real politics. And the promises made were we're going to upgrade the armed forces. And it's only during the time President Duterte, you're correct, and I agree with him, that we should really enhance our military capability. We're going with Japan. We have a visiting force agreement with Australia, if I'm not mistaken, and other things. No, Korea is supplying us with weaponry. Of course, we have to buy arms from the Americans also. But the point is, the visiting force agreement is a way upon which we have a relationship with America because of the Mutual Defense Pact or the Mutual Assistance Pact. Pagka may mangyari, we would have to go there, as you said earlier. They would have to reckon with America's military forces. But at that time, there was no China threatening us. And I use that word guardedly because I never look at our neighbors with respect to their intent, but with their capability. And any country will tell us, we're not going to harm you, but if their capability and what they do indicate that they could threaten us and we could be under their heel, we will have to. So for an example, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, if I raise that question out of what we call the old phrase, realpolitik. Has anything changed that will mean now that we don't need the visiting forces agreement now?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Yes. All right, Your Honor. Well, to begin with, you're correct. In military doctrine, capability equals intent. If they can harm us, we must assume they will try. Other than that, under no administration has there been such a buildup in military capability as under the Duterte administration. That said, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and all the others look to us for an alliance for one reason. That the United States backs us up under the Mutual Defense Treaty. In other words, by bringing up our military capabilities, our military assets, we make ourselves a more likely target of aggression to trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty. But without that treaty, then you just simply sink a Philippine public vessel, and all you say is goodbye.
On the long haul, it is our security that ultimately matters. Would that be correct?
For now.
Now, let me just ask Secretary Lorenzana then. The VFA is essentially good for our military. Would that be correct, sir?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but can I go back to the original question, Senator?
Yes, sir.
Do we need? Now, I think the VFA was born out of the mutual needs of the U.S. and the Philippines. Let's go back to 1992 when they left. Before that, practically all our equipment came from the U.S. When they left, all the supplies of spare parts and everything dried up. So I think in 1992, we had about more than 100 helicopters flying and 5 C-130s. In 1999, when they came back, I think only 3 dozens of our helicopters were flying. So that is a lesson that I think we should learn very hard, that we cannot source our equipment from just one source. So we need, again, when they came back in 1998 and started...
Excuse me, sir. Would you say that even with the United States presence at that time, we could have built up relationships with other countries, buy our equipment with other countries at the time, or were we being held back?
Say again,
In
Senator.
other words, can the Philippines buy aircraft from Israel? Can we buy aircraft from, as Indonesia has done, MiG-29s? They have that, or for that matter, Malaysia. Could we buy that without offending
Yes,
the Americans in terms of the agreement?
Yes, Mr. Senator. In fact, I think the abrogation of the basis was predicated on the argument of the Senate then, that they can replace all the funds being given to the armed forces.
No, my point, sir, is para naghihintay tayo may mangyari. In other words, kung nandiyan na yung Amerikano, dapat sinamantala na natin, nag-build up na tayo, nag-concentrate tayo sa ating commercial capability, our economic capability, hindi tayo nagre-rely, and that's what I'm heading for right now. Kung pupuntahan natin yan at hindi tayo handa at mauubos na naman tayo sa pangako na magkakaroon na tayo ng strength in our capabilities, in our military, we will have more trade with the rest of the world, especially America, which is our #1 trading partner right now. If you're going to remove this, is that in the national interest really? Especially before, nandiyan ang Amerika, hindi makapasok yung kapitbahay nating malaki sa Scarborough Shoals. In fact, the Americans were using that as a bombing area, and our people could go there. Vietnam could go there. But magmula noon, hindi na tayo makapasok. And if you ask them, oh, umalis na kayo dyan. Dati naman, nandiyan, naging isda kami, kaibigan namin kayo. Eh, sasabihin nila ngayon, make me. Make me. Kaya nyo bang paalisin kami ang aming mga Coast Guard dito, ang aming mga military vessels dito? And what do? We become a pipsqueak of a nation. And that's why there is that deterrent na kung meron tayong alliance at meron tayong, we have that alliance, we build up, we will have more independent foreign policy. And my question to you, sir, is simply this. We have a budget of 197 billion pesos for our military. Is that correct, sir? 197 billion.
Yes, Senator.
And let me tell you the real politics of the matter. Hindi po ba totoo na 119 billion is used for personnel services?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
So, konti na lang ang natitira.
Yes, the 119 million is, I think, personnel services, and you have to add some more the pension fund of the retirees and the veterans.
That's correct, sir. Meron pa tayong problema sa pension funds, nalalaki. Na magkakaroon tayong problema, lumalaki taon-taon yan. Not to mention the fact that we still Abu Sayyaf, we still have NPA, and kailangan at the same time build up our Navy, build up our Coast Guard. So, ito na tanong ko, real politics, kailangan ba natin na magkaroon, kailangan ba natin alisin yan? Iyan tinatawag natin Visiting Forces Agreement. Not because of dependency, kasi kung aalisin yan, mangangako na naman tayo, papabuild up natin yan, eh nakalaan 30 years na itong nawala yung bases hanggang ngayon. I don't think, thank you Senator President Duterte, nakakuha tayo ng mga gamit, I don't think it's sufficient. Would you say it would be sufficient? I'm looking at Dr. Carlos. And after Secretary Lozana answers it, because we have to really look at it from an objective point of view. Because hindi naman pwede na aalis I don't want to go into a mischievous question, hindi porque nainis tayo sa kanila, nainis tayo sa mga senador ng Amerikano, hindi naman sila gagawa ng policy. Pwede naman natin silang sabihan, oy, hindi nyo pwedeng gawin yan. Ibabalikan natin sa policy ng gobyerno ng Amerika, tayo rin ang masasaktan. In other words, we're, what is the term, Teddy Boy? I'm sorry, we've been associated so long in Accra, we've had the Spanish-American War in Accra, and we're still continuing it here.
Your Honor, I would like to ask the National Security Advice.
Now, let me just, I just need to have this answered. Because the prevailing issue, every time we have an agreement, and that's why the Senate is involved in ratifying the agreement. That's why the founding fathers of the Constitution in 1987 said you have to have the Senate, is because kailangan malalaman natin ang national interest. Kailangan natin yan. Kung hindi natin gagawin, ibig sabihin, importante yan. Now, kung wala na yung national interest, ang tanong ko sa inyo ngayon, is it in our national interest to terminate the VFA at this point in time? At this point in time.
Mr. Chairman, may I give an input to that?
With all due respect to my good friend, Secretary Esperon, I'd like the Secretary of Defense to answer, and then from the academy, Secretary Carlos, or Dr. Carlos, and then Secretary Esperon. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Chair, I think our long-term interest is to be self-sufficient in our defense. We should have at least a minimum deterrent capability. Now, whether we need the VFA indefinitely, I think we do not need the VFA indefinitely. So we should use the interim to build up our capabilities.
That is something that we will not debate with you. As you know, we've always supported the military. But ang bagal eh. Hindi talaga umaabot eh. I always use the word, make me. When you have an enemy and you say, get out of our territory, and he says to you, mas marami akong gamit sa'yo, make me. Just like Castro could not do anything about America when they were saying, remove Guantanamo from us, malis na kayo, sabi ng Amerikano, make me. Spratly, eto ngayon, Scarborough Shoals, make me. So I don't think I have my own views about it. I just wanted to get your own views, and because I respect you a lot. May I ask Dr. Carlos?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Why am I here? I think I was invited because I had been a senior consultant of the Commission since 2013. Maybe a little bit of background. When we came in, when, what's his name, General Oban was there, he brought me there because he discovered that the VFA was ratified in 1999, and there was no IRR. In other words, whatever you have in the VFA were couched in broad strokes, and that's the reason why Smith, remember when the Americans questioned the concept of adequate facilities in our jails, the Americans questioned, of course, the adequacy of what we had, and that's the reason why binitbit nila si Smith sa loob ng embassy. So, what am I saying? What we're saying is that the IRR, which was finished in June 2016, was 16 years late. So before then, to be fair to the Americans, talaga nagwiwido sila kasi walang mga nitty-gritty on how in fact they will conduct themselves pagbaba dito. Halimbawa, no, with due respect to you, Sec. Rambuanga, nagdating na rito yung barko, tapos saka lang natin hihingin nyo, ano ba yung nasa loob ng barko nyo? Sino ba yung nandyan sa loob? Dapat
Nasabi po ba ninyo, excuse me if I may interrupt, no? Unequal strengths are the result of an equal bargaining strength or an equal talent?
Not necessarily.
Well,
remember,
16
you didn't
years.
have gun in your head when you ratified, I mean, you, not you, the Senate ratified this in 1999. I'm sure hinimay nyo yan, ano? That's the reason why what we did, I mean, what we helped the Commission with when we did the IRR is you cannot go beyond what is in the agreement. And if I may just give, konti lang kasaysayan kung bakit tayo ng BFA, no? Di ba pinalis natin Amerikano 1991 ba yun, 1992? You remember that time, wala pang ginagawa dun sa Mischief Reef, para lang ano yan, fisherman's shelter, diba? Mga bamboo lang. 1999, 1998, na-discover natin na hindi na siya mga bamboo dwellings, kundi they are really radar stations, very, very sophisticated radar stations, and certainly you're a stupid person if you think that it's just for a fisherman's haven. And that's the reason why, again, to be fair to the Americans, tayo na naglagay ng leg ng Mutual Defense Treaty dahil nasa Constitution natin na bawal na sila rito. And so, I prepared a one-page presentation here, but in brief, it simply says, you want to review it, review it. Anyway, dun sa dulo ng BFA, nakalagay naman dun, magbigay ka ng 180 days in writing, sabihin mo sa kanila. And as I said, to repeat, we were not under duress when we had this ratified. And security architecture has already changed. I remember Senator Gordon, na kwento ko na ata sa iyo noon na sometime in Washington, D.C., I delivered a paper on rendering the AFP obsolescent. Kasi parang huling-huli na kayo sa panahon, no? Ang dami-dami yung Philippine Army, etc. I'm sure maraming magagalit sa akin. Bago kayo magalit, basahin niyo muna yung paper ko, no? Imbis galit kayo nagalit, hindi nyo nakikita yung... The paper is really saying that wag na kayo nagre-recruit ng high school, puro PhDs ang i-recruit nyo kasi the war has transferred to cyberspace. So, hindi mo na nga kailangan, ilan ba kayo ngayon, Secretary Lonisana, parang 160,000 kayo, no? Ang daming pinapasweldo natin, etc. So, bago natin ayusin itong VFA, bigla na natin sasabihin i-terminate, ayos muna natin yung geographical context ng security. It has changed so radically. It has changed so radically, and therefore you need a rethinking of what security looks like. And let's stop talking about sovereignty and territoriality. For God's sake, economies are in mesh already. Why are we talking about setting up these artificial boundaries? If I may give a side story, when I brought the National Defense College to Moscow, hindi pa ako nakakaupo. Ang unang tanong agad sa akin, Secretary Locsin, is, Dr. Carlos, why is the Philippines not buying from arms from us? Mas mura naman mga helicopter namin, tanke, etc. Sabi ko, oo nga, no, ba't nga? Sabi ko, well, first of all, we're not training with you. So, we're buying from the Americans because we're training with the Americans. And so, Your Honor, itong BFA, yung ginawa namin ni IRR, kasi hindi ba Russia gustong-gusto talaga makipag-train sa atin? Last year, Japan already trained with us. Vietnam wants to train with us. China wants to train and exercise with us. Yes, this time, they are not exercising together to fight together. They are exercising against an enemy, and it's called the consequences of climate change. Iba na, hindi ba, Yusek? HIDR na eh. Sana sinabi mo kanina na hindi na yung balikatan, sama-sama, etc. Iba na yung tono ng exercises. And so if you want to review it, let us review the whole thing. EDCA, SEB, Securities Engagement Board, Mutual Defense Treaty. Reviewin natin lahat. And tama ka, Senator Gordon, ano? Buksan natin ang sarili natin sa India, Russia, all the others who would like to train and exercise with us. The alliance system is dead. Ngayon po, bilaterals na lang and multilaterals. Kung sino man magbili ng ating pineapple, etc., virgin coconut oil, dyan tayo. Ideology is dead also. So, the alliance system is dead, and as I said, let us have a real rethinking of where we are.
Thank you, ma'am. So same question of Senator Gordon, Secretary Esperon, and then Secretary Locsin, if you want to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just go back to some of the sequence of agreements that we have had with the United States of America. A short review. We had, of course, the visiting the military bases agreement in 1947 after the war, and that, of course, authorized the further stay of the United States forces in Subic and Clark and other bases after the war, when we became independent in 1945. Then in 1951, we came up with the agreement on which we called the Mutual Defense Treaty, primarily concentrating on any attack in the territory and public conveyances or military conveyances of the Philippines. But we will note that in the 1947 and 1951, there was not any governing rule on the conduct of forces in the Philippines. And that is why we had controversies on how they conducted themselves outside, except for rules and regulations that we had to come up every now and then. There was no formal visiting forces agreement. That came about already in 1999 when we have terminated the military bases agreement. So no more USA, no more US forces in the Philippines, supposed to be effective 1992. So what we had, because by the MBA, we were provided all the weapons and all that we needed. They were all US. We were the first in Asia to have fighters. We were ahead. We had the blue diamonds, so to say. We had probably the best ships in Asia at that time because they were all provided by the US. We did not, and we thank them for that. But that was part of the rentals. And so we did not develop our military industry because we were getting it all from the United States. So when they left, what we have, we crafted our 1995 AFP Modernization Act. For 15 years, we were supposed to get from 30 to 50 billion a year. And what happened? I want to discuss that in the executive session.
Secretary, excuse, in the meantime, the Vice Chairman, Senator Tolentino, will preside. I need to leave for a few minutes to participate in the nationwide Pasalord prayer. Okay. Thank you, Senator Tolentino will preside.
All right, Secretary.
And so, by 2010, we should have developed our armed forces of the Philippines. But I want to discuss, if we have to discuss that, we have to discuss it in an executive session, partly because of that. Then, this year, as of this year, we are already in the second tranche of the new modernization plan. But you look at our General Appropriations Act, and you will find out that we have 5 billion for modernization. 5 billion. 5 billion would be equivalent to something like probably 10 helicopters. So where are we getting the funds for our ships and even for our submarine perhaps? And so I would like to make that as an input for the executive session.
So you're saying we're not spending enough for our armed forces. We're not serious. You have a threat. You want to spend peanuts. That has been the whole history of our country's defense posture. Would you say that's correct, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you for giving the summarizing.
In fact, when the first, well, we don't, I just follow what are the facts, no? The point was, even in the first tranche of these taxes, I had to talk with the president because I wanted the 13% from the first tranche of the new taxes to go to the military for defense because 5 billion has never really been spent well through the years, right? They were supposed to do that every year. Pero hindi naman nangyari. So, ang sinasabi ko, we go back to this. You need a VFA, and I agree with Secretary Carlos, we have to prepare also, Dr. Carlos, we have to prepare also for cyber attacks. And then I'll have to meet you in another committee on National Grid Corporation, putting that dark fiber there, and that might really intervene in our security once again. So what I'm trying to get back here is, when we decide, and I'd like to ask Secretary Locsin now, at the moment, what is the national interest consideration in making this decision? I'm glad I heard submarines from Secretary Esperon. Because kahit paano, yeah, but then I don't think it's executive session. I don't want to hide anything from you. The people must know. Now we have been bereft of caring for our military. We expect them to do something that we cannot. So we are forced now to have relationships with other countries. Diba? President, of course, nakakuha siya. Hingi siya ng AK-47s dun sa Russia. Hingi siya sa China. So to my mind, there's got to be a circling of the wagons on what we really need to do. Prioritization. Ano ba kailangan natin gawin para sa armed forces? Ang kailangan natin handa para sa cyber attacks. Para sa ganun, we can really live in peace and security and confidence. Secretary Locsin, sir?
I take my cue from Secretary Lorenzano, who told me once, we may not win the war, but we can certainly give them a bloody nose. We cannot at this point give them any nose, bloody or otherwise, because we need time. And perhaps that's why we need to review the VFA, because while it is necessary for our national defense at the moment, we must prepare for the eventuality that, for example, like the US bases. I was there in the Pentagon when they said, we're no longer interested. So we must wait for that eventuality. Yes, I believe we have to spend more on national defense. Indonesia and Malaysia, they all spend a lot more on national defense. And yet,
we're one of the lowest.
yes, and yet, in spite of that, they are repeatedly attacked. And we are not that repeatedly attacked because we are backed up by American power. Because, you know, as I said once, and they got angry, you sink one of our ships and it's World War III and the end of the planet. That really helps. But we can't keep doing that because let me give you an example of what really happened here. Scarborough was lost to the other guy because they came in, our ships, one ship, bravely confronted them, and the United States under Obama said, because Obama was looking for Chinese trade and investments, said, stand down. And so we stood down. Then Obama said...
Upon the promise that the other side is going to pull back too.
Exactly. Stand down, and both
story.
of you, we stood down.
They did
and
not
both
pull
of
back.
you, withdraw. We withdrew, they did not, and
Correct.
created a fact on the ground. So it is against that eventuality that this administration, for the first time in Philippine history, is trying to build up, if not an overwhelming military superiority against an enemy, certainly the ability to hurt that enemy and make them think 10 times
Like the
before hurting
Vietnamese
us.
did to China. Like Indonesia did to their ships when they intruded in the Indonesian area, right?
Exactly.
So this
But
is something
remember-
that we can at least show. Like
Yes,
Finland did to the Soviet Union.
Yes, but...
And they lost too.
But remember that in the case of Indonesia and the others for the time being, they live off our mutual defense treaty. Because without American power in the region, none of these countries that have spent enormous fortunes can stand up to whoever. So at the moment, I think perhaps we should review the VFA. Certainly we should do that. Because I don't believe that because we need them, we should suffer insults to our sovereignty
I
from
agree.
them. So we
agree.
go down and say, this is how angry we are now. Let's review this, and in a way that imparts the mutual respect that should underpin a mutual defense. This is the time to do it. And for that, we owe it to, if you want, the temper of our president.
Thank you, Secretary Locsin. With the indulgence of
Go ahead.
Senator Gordon, Senator Marcos would like to interject.
Follow-up lang po. Para patunayan yung dinidiin ng ating Secretary of Foreign Affairs na hindi lamang sinabi ng mga Amerikano kay Secretary Pompeo, kundi nakasulat na talagang tutulong sila pag inatake ang isang vessel ng ating military. Ano kaya? Pwede ba nating hingin? Dr. Carlos, kay Secretary Lorenzana po, pwede rin po ba natin hingin sa Amerika na palayasin na ang China sa Scarborough Shoal? Sapagkat alam naman natin to mula pa nung panahon ng Katsila, atin naman yan. Diyan naman nangingisda ang tao natin. At nung kinupkop ng Amerika ang Pilipinas, bahagi ng teritoryo na kanilang kinuha bilang colony nila, yung Scarborough Shoal. Noong 2012, sabi ni Obama Clinton, magpipivot daw sila sa Asia. Pero ganun pa man, sabi nila, ay hindi pwede. Kasi ang Scarborough Shoal, alitan lang sa teritoryo. Bakit ngayon? Ngayon na in writing na ang kanilang pangako. Nakatakda na, andyan na, klarong-klaro. Hindi po ba, nagre-review na lang tayo at talagang binabalasan natin ng maigi, hindi ba pwedeng sabihin ng Pilipinas na magpatulong na sa US? Sabi na ni Presidente last year, lay off Pag-asa. Sinabi na ni Presidente yun, Abril pa yun bakit hindi natin hingin sa mga Amerikano? Patunayan nila. Talaga bang may visa itong agreement natin na tatlo na yan? Hingin natin yan. Pwede ho ba yun?
I wouldn't do it. Simply because this is a mutual defense treaty and not an invitation to a war. When it happened, they should have sunk our ship. Our ship should have allowed itself to be sunk and ignore Obama. When our ship is sunk, without any consent from the U.S., you trigger the mutual defense treaty. What happens when that happens? You can say, maybe America will not come to our defense because who are we? I'll tell you why. Because during the Cold War, under your father, whom I greatly admired, there was one thing. They would always say they will go to war for Germany if the Soviet Union crossed because they are white. No, they will go to war over the Philippines, not because of the color of our skin, because in international affairs, you depend on prestige. And the Americans have repeatedly said, we may not want to go to war over the Philippines, but if we do not go to war under a mutual defense treaty, our credibility throughout the world goes down. So yes, they will go to war, but we should have asked for it. We should have put up a fight. We should have ignored Obama. We should have let our ship sink.
Pero Secretary, nagbago na eh. Si Presidente Trump na ngayon, tapos si Secretary Pompeo, nagsabi na sila talagang tutulungan daw tayo eh. Talagang paninindigan daw nila yung MDT, paninindigan yung VFA at saka EDCA. Ba't subukan lang natin, hingin natin sa Amerika. Patalsikin yung mga Chinese dyan sa teritoryo. Memorize nila yan. Yung buong mapa ng Pilipinas, kinolonize nila eh. Di alam nila na bahagi yan ng Pilipinas. Bakit hindi? Hingin lang natin. Subukan lang natin. Sinusuri na rin natin ang mga agreement na to. Subukan lang natin.
Well, when that happened under President Aquino, I made a suggestion, but unfortunately I was merely a publisher. I said, President Aquino and I should join what's our only boat? We had only one boat. And I will be a ship's cook. He will sail into the disputed waters. And when they sink it and kill the Philippine president, and the cook, me, that will trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty. In other words, before you can trigger that, we must die first. Don't you think that's fair? You cannot ask under Mutual Defense Treaty that another country go to war unless we first suffer an attack. Let's invite it. I ask for volunteers.
Secretary Lorenzana, tumatawa po kayo. At alam ko na 15 anyos kayo nasa Washington bilang military attaché. Bawal bang hingin yun? Panindigan nila yung kanilang kasulatan, yung kanilang treaty?
We have not tried that, Mr. Chair. Maybe Secretary Tidiboy would ask us as Secretary of Foreign Affairs. But about a year ago, I went to the Pentagon and I visited the Secretary of Defense, and we talked about the Mutual Defense Treaty because by that time, I had been advocating for the review the Mutual Defense Treaty. And for some reason, the U.S. do not want it reviewed. So I went to the Pentagon and talked to the Secretary of Defense and said, the reason why I want, I told them, the MDT to be reviewed is that while the MDT provides for an attack in one of our countries or vessels, the adversary seems to know this. They do not attack vessels of the Philippines. They just creep forward one by one, island to island, and said, to us that is our territory, to you it is not. So there is a disconnect between our interpretation of the MDT and yours. So yun po, Mr. Chairman, ang sabi ko sa kanila, kaya gusto kong i-review para maklaro natin kung ano ba talaga yung territory na involved, na covered ng MDT, kasi sa kanila, hindi kasama yung sa Metropolitan Philippines, yung Scarborough Shoal. Whereas, ever since the Spanish time, it is, as you said, Senator Amy, it's part of our territory.
Po, si Dr. Carlos po. Pero hindi po ba, talagang may report na yung AFP that there's been a substantial change in the presence of China since April 2019 when a Chinese warship appeared 7 to 12 nautical miles off Philippine coast. So iba ng itsura nun. Hindi na natin masasabi na maritime militia lang yan. Hindi na natin masasabi na patrol boats lang yan, mga military surveillance. Ito, warship na at dumidikit na 7 to 12 nautical miles. Hindi po ba nag-iba na ang ginagawa nilang so-called patrol? Dr. Carlos po.
Well, with all due respect, I don't think it's politic to us, the Americans, to do something which we ourselves could not do. Plus, again, let me hark back to that theme I mentioned earlier, that the security architecture has changed. So our interest in the contested South China Sea is no longer the natural gas, the oil, but it's the fish. You know, and kailan pa ako nasa National Defense, it was 1998, binubuno na natin yung Code of Conduct na yan, no? So, wala namang mangyayari dyan. Okay, put it on paper. Do you have the, if you can put sanctions there and if you can bind the countries to follow? I doubt very much, especially Senator Gordon already noted the asymmetric, the largely asymmetric nature of the relationship. So how about we shift gear and talk about fish, because fish is the resource that we're fighting over. And whenever I go to China, I always tell them that whatever they harvest in their territory, pinapanganak po yan sa Palawan. Miski namang isang isda, hindi nakikishare sila. So how about we push a regional fishing agreement? You know, the who, what, when, and how. When are you going to declare a fishing holiday? Who is going to fish where? And it's not just between the Philippines and China. It should be all waters washed by the China Sea, South China Sea, East China Sea, etc. If we shift gear and we moved away from a military perspective, then I think we are going to get more traction, for one. And who's going to quarrel about fish? That is that's our main strategic interest. And if I may just have one sentence in regard to the earlier discussion, I think before, I think this is well known when I was still at defense, and that's why I had so many enemies there. I said that even before you buy things, you'd better be sure what you're buying is linked to a strategic plan, and the operation and tactical aspects of those are linked to those things. Hindi po alin nagbibili ka, tapos maghahanap ka kung nasan ba yan nakalink, no? That's the reason why I think we need what the strategic plan looks like. Saka pa kayo magbili-bili, no? And yung pagbili-bili, yung dulo yun, no? And I also raised that issue, ba't ba submarine binili mo? Ba't ba helicopters ang pakialaman mo? Bakit hindi yung Navy ang pakialaman mo? Kasi yun naman ang interest mo na pakialaman mo yung karagatan. Diba?
Maraming salamat po, Dr. Sa Apo Chairman, with all due respect. Sa palagay ko, kalahati ng langis sa mundo ay dumadaan sa South China Sea. 30% ng trade sa buong mundo dumadaan din dyan. Kaya talagang very strategic. Ang suggestion ko po, kabisado ni Secretary Lorenzana at saka ni Secretary June Esperanto, gayahin po natin yung sistema ng China ng assassin's maze, na talagang an inferior power with inferior, smaller weapons can cause great trouble for a much larger, superior power. Maraming salamat po.
Senator Tolentino.
Mr. Chair, I surmise in the interest of time, for a more cohesive flow of discussion, that we allow the National Security Team to discuss their presentations in an executive session. But before that, Mr. Chair, I would want to have the presentations coming from the Department of Justice as to the legality of all of this. The Vice Chair is now aiding you. I would want a little discussion on the case Sablowski Act, because the United States consider this as an executive agreement. I would want to have a discussion relative to the review. Would that entail a suspension, even though it's not part of the VFA, but part of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, specifically Article 59? Do we suspend this while we review? And then for NEDA, perhaps a discussion on, with the permission of my colleagues, a discussion on the economic implications, because right now, 2020, we're supposed to have a free trade agreement with the United States. So as this evolves, how will this be affected, Mr. Chair? And finally, in the interest of fairness and transparency, and perhaps the good Secretary of National Defense may have missed this, aside from Haiyan, the United States, through the BFA, indeed assisted us in several disasters, notably in 2012, Typhoon Bopa in Davao, Typhoon Frank in 2008, Typhoon Ketsana and Parma in 2009, and recently, even the volcanic gadget used during the Taal volcano eruption came from USAID. So to add, perhaps this missed the memory of our good friend Secretary Lorenzana. And during the executive session, perhaps, Mr. Chair, we can ask the good Secretary of Foreign Affairs. This is a follow-up to my previous question. The appropriateness, if this agreement will be terminated, of having sub-agreements relative to the implementation of the MDT. Because I understand you were the one who signed the defense agreement providing us with materials coming from Japan. That was November 2018. And I have here with me a copy, and we don't have an MDT with Japan. And I have here a copy of an India-US agreement. Also, they don't have an MDT. It has something to do with logistics. So in the executive session, with the permission of the chair, if we can start with Yusek Mark Perret of the DOJ, and thereafter the NEDA representative. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Before you answer, Yusek, so we will just have a working lunch na muna rito, okay, and then because so that we can talk about matters we can publicly talk about, no? So economic, DOJ, etc. And then maybe after our lunch, we can now hold our executive session, and we might adjourn our hearing during already the executive session. So those resource persons who were invited to talk about matters like concurrence of the Senate to treaties, this is now also your time to comment on the pending resolution. So, Yusek Mark, please answer the question of Senator Tolentino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Senator. We understand the case Subloki Act was or has been treated by the Supreme Court in relation to the requirement under the Constitution that the other contracting party, with respect to a treaty relating to the entry of forces as well as foreign facilities in the Philippines, be considered by that party as equivalent to a treaty as we treat it under Philippine law. And this particular question has been a vexing question even to our Supreme Court, especially in the context of the Madeline versus Texas decision of the Federal Supreme Court of the United States. And we refer specifically to the case of Nicolas versus the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, where the members of the Supreme Court were divided on exactly how to treat the consequence of this act in relation to the constitutional requirement. But we note, Mr. Chair, Mr. Senator, that the majority of the court in that case treated the VFA as a treaty, meaning it complied with all the requirements under our constitutional scheme.
If I may, but perhaps the core question here is that can the executive withdraw from an existing treaty, given that it's not part. There is no precedent yet. The only precedent that I have here is when Jimmy Carter, President Carter, withdrew from the U.S.-Taiwan military agreement unilaterally because of perhaps the one China policy. So I think your study has to evolve in that initiative, Yusek.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Senator, thank you for this particular input. As probably the body is already appraised of, the Office of the President has requested the Department of Justice to look into this matter specifically.
When will you finish?
We are still in the process of finalizing our report to be submitted to the Office of the President.
And can the draft or the final report be furnished this committee?
We would have to submit it to the Office of the President as a courtesy, Mr. Senator, but should there be a requirement, I think the Office of the President would.
Because, Mr. Chair, I have with me, and I'd like to make this as part of the records, the joint report of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, Committee on National Defense and Security, dated 1999. And it involves everything. And Mr. Chair, to shortcut all of this, I'd like to turn this over to you and to the committee secretariat to be part of the records of this committee hearing. Go ahead, Yusek Perete.
Yes, Mr. Senator. Once we finish the report and submit it to the Office of the President, we would request, upon the instruction of this committee, if it may be made public or at least shared to this committee.
Okay, NEDA, please. On the B9 resolution about the implication of the possible termination of the VFA, so on the economic side.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Martha Flores. I'm from the Public Investment Staff. We have a draft response to the letter invitation for listing benefits of the three. If you allow me, I'll just read some of the comments that were put together. Maybe I'll also introduce first that maybe it was given to us that the task of putting all the comments together, because I'm with the public investment staff, and we're the ones dealing with USAID. That's development cooperation. That has nothing to do with the VFA. So I'll beg your that I am not so into the. I'd just like to read quickly the seen benefits on the VFI benefits of the VFA. I mean, is on promoting greater amity and cooperation with all nations. We're couching it around the Philippine Development Plan goals and objectives. In that, this is it's designed to promote interoperability, maritime safety, security, maritime domain awareness, and humanitarian assistance and disaster response between the Philippines and the U.S. This is consistent with the strategy set out in the Philippine Development Plan. Chapter 18 specifically on ensuring security, public order, and safety to strengthen existing bilateral agreements and defense cooperation agreements. So that's it's the benefit of listed benefit on. It is on establishing a credible and self-reliant defense posture. The EDCA was also designed to support the modernization of armed forces of the Philippines, strengthening its capability for external defense. It's consistent with the strategy laid out in the Philippine Development Plan. The termination of the VFA and EDCA may adversely affect the attainment of the AFP's modernization objectives, as well as fulfillment of the obligations under the MDT to maintain and develop the Philippines and United States individual and collective defense capabilities, which still remain in effect. These are just on providing humanitarian assistance and disaster response. Current benefit from BFA, it has allowed the military to provide U.S. military to provide significant assistance to the Philippines. As already mentioned earlier, Yolanda. Now, if what are the ramifications, perceived ramifications, I guess our inputs are we already defer to the departments of Foreign Affairs and on the.
Ma'am, thank you. Senator Tolentino, what's your other question?
The question that probably was answered directly by the NEDA representative can be answered by Secretary Locsin. It has something to do with our current negotiations for that free trade agreement because anecdotal news reports indicate that after the U.S. signs their agreement with Mexico and Canada, the Philippines will be next. So what would be the ramification of this termination of the VFA, if any, with that free trade agreement with the United States, Secretary?
Sir, again, let me thank you for your suggestion, which I will follow up about writing notes in the event the abrogation continues. But aside from that, I think there will be a chilling effect on our economic relations. Definitely, I have had this experience, both Senator Drilon and I, under Cory Aquino, when the bases, despite her opposition, were nonetheless removed. The government and the country really suffered. The same happened when she refused to join the alliance against Iraq. So they apparently take a dim view of failures to cooperate, and it's reflected in their economic policies. I expect the Senate and the House to be hostile to any free trade agreement.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission.
Senator Gordon.
This is something that we have not really discussed adequately. This is what we should be discussing. What are the repercussions? First, national interest. What are the repercussions on defense? What are the repercussions on trade? And I have not heard anything cogent, pardon me. I was saying na panay formula tayo dito. But what is the real politics out there? Our foreign direct investment is still down. We're not taking advantage, for example, and I shouldn't use that word. We should be looking at what's happening in China. You know, Hyundai has closed their factories because China can no longer produce the parts. Apple is not producing because they're closing their factories down. And we should be looking at trying to get more business from the Americans to come down here, like Vietnam is doing. I don't think we're watching the story here. That's what I would like to do. What happens here? And what happens if we retain it and we have a lot of goodwill with them? Maybe, I don't know, we can get more purchase in terms of foreign investments. Would you agree with that, sir? Secretary Locsin?
Definitely, there's a special relationship between the president and the Philippine president and the U.S. president, which I believe will be in the last analysis.
Who was just
The two will be the ones to decide how we shall move forward. President Duterte and President Trump. He has just delivered his State of the Nation address.
Yes. So there would be
under this, yes.
There would be possible repercussions if we just, just remove the agreement.
You mean will it be positive?
No, yeah. I said
we
there
don't
would be
know that yet.
repercussions
Actually,
that could be negative,
yeah.
more negative than positive.
Well, without being facetious,
We
Your
should not be
Honor,
talking about that in terms of showing our cards. So, but
Yeah.
indeed, we have very few cards to play.
well, it's hard enough to understand the past. Trying to predict the future is really a big problem for us. So, but I think together, perhaps in executive session, we can explore the possibilities so as not to. There are things that should not be said in public because then it affects the outcome.
Yes,
Without
of course.
meaning to.
Of course, that's why I said those remarks. I made those remarks.
Thank you, sir.
Just one question on Secretary Locsin, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Drilon.
Yes, in the course of your presentation, Secretary Locsin, you mentioned very clearly that the termination of the VFA must be viewed in terms of the overall national interest of the country. May I ask a direct question? Will the termination of the VFA be in the overall national interest of the country?
I would rather answer that in executive session. At this point, it's beginning to trench on our ability to maneuver. This is a situation that was created where we can also use it to negotiate for better terms under the VFA, even if we find it absolutely essential to the national defense. But if we show our cards here now, perhaps it'll be a little harder, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. There is, sige.
But isn't that embarrassing? The very fact that we cannot even discuss it and, without revealing our cards, because we really have very few cards to play. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, a question to the Secretary of National Defense. We have a body which is tasked to periodically review the VFA. Do we have a body which is tasked to periodically review EDCA and then also the MDT?
None, Mr. Chairman. I'm not aware of anybody that is tasked to
do that?
Review. But I have a team at the DND who are looking at it already and talking to the other side on how we go about crafting or revisiting the MDT. For the EDCA, I am not aware of anything, Mr.
Okay, so MDT, DND na. Okay. And then, Yusek Rambuanga, yung review nyo of the VFA is you really limited it to the VFA? You're not looking at EDCA, VFA lang? Okay, sige po.
Yes, sir.
Basta klaro po yan. Okay, so before we go on executive session, or you can finish your lunch, anybody who wants to comment on the Drilon resolution making withdrawal from treaties valid only with Senate concurrence, that is resolution number 305. So may we hear from our resource persons who want to comment?
Secretary Malaya has
Secretary Malaya?
He's our resource.
Mr. Chair, and also in relation to what the good Senator Tolentino had asked, if there are precedents in U.S. law on the unilateral revocation by the U.S. executive of agreements. You did mention of the case of Goldwater versus Carter on the termination by Jimmy Carter of the 1954 Mutual Defense Treaty with Taiwan. There are two other cases that we found out, and this is Beacon Products Corporation versus Reagan, and this pertains to Reagan's unilateral termination of the Treaty of Friendship with Nicaragua. And thirdly and last, there is this case of Kucinich versus Bush, and this pertains to the U.S. withdrawal from the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. In all three cases, Mr. Chair, the U.S. Supreme Court deemed the challenge to the President's action as political questions. So, therefore, the U.S. Supreme Court did not review and pass judgment on those acts of the U.S. President. If I may just, add some more information,
Undersecretary Malaya.
Yes, sir.
The U.S. Supreme Court did not pass upon the validity of the proposition that the Senate U.S. concurrence, Senate concurrence is needed. They said this is a political question, we do not want to rule on it. So please, in fact, is that correct, sir? Please use your microphone.
That is correct, sir. They deemed it as political question, so
Yes.
they didn't want to rule upon it.
So at this point, it is an open question. The matter of the power of the Senate to require concurrence.
That's arguable, sir.
Yes.
But
It's arguable at this point. That's why it's an open question. In fact, our own Supreme Court has not yet ruled on the issue of the validity of the withdrawal from the Rome Statute.
that is correct, sir. Yeah, the case is pending.
If I may, Your Honor, even if it is, if one is on the question of a political question handled by the Supreme Court, I think after the EDSA revolution, that became an open question. It's no longer sufficient to say it's political. But on the other hand, assuming that the political question doctrine was raised again, a co-equal branch of government is not powerless, especially the Congress. The Congress can, and the Senate, exert pressure, probably stronger than if they went to the court, by simply impacting it on our budgets and teaching us a lesson.
I have an additional question. Would you say, Secretary Malaya and Secretary Locsin, that if the American Supreme Court or even the Philippine Supreme Court has avoided the issue because they're saying it's a political question? Because the reason probably is because there is that great principle that Americans' foreign policy must really be handled by the president. And because things go so fast, they have no time at times to consult the Congress. Would you say that?
Yes, it is for that reason why I did not think and still do not believe the president should have consulted any of us when he made the announcement that the act of insulting Philippine sovereignty by questioning the justice system is entirely his discretion.
Well,
that it sends the right signal.
I will disagree with you on that last point, because to me, a slur, an insult, should not have anything to do with foreign policy. I think foreign policy must be totally dictated not by whim, caprice, or sudden slight, but by what is really a determination of what is needed, especially for our country, for our armed forces, because they have to lay it on the line. Upon the other hand, the reason why I posited that remark is because I think I would tend to say it would depend on the issue. And I agree with Senator Drilon that we should all review. But at times I would even hasten to say it would depend on the issue, because on the matter of this, I think because we were asked to ratify it, because it was a very, very important issue to us, we should be able to be consulted and be able to debate. That's why I'm against having an executive session, because you can always say this is executive privilege. But insofar as I'm concerned, all these issues must be understood by the Filipino people when we discuss these things, so that we contributed to the maturation of the thinking of our country, that we do not conduct foreign policy on a whim or personal matters, and I'm not accusing anybody of that. I'm just very concerned that we have to make sure that we do it because it is what is most important for our country. That's all I have to say, unless you want to make a comment on that.
No, you're completely correct. But on certain, however, on certain issues, the nuts and bolts of the national defense, I think if outside parties were to know it, I wouldn't advertise both our strengths and our weaknesses.
We join in that thinking as well.
Senator Tolentino.
I don't want to get the ire of my colleagues here, because I'm for the strengthening of the Senate vis-a-vis existing constitutional provisions. But if I may ask directly the DOJ representative, hypothetically, would it be part of your review system that you recommend later on, that instead of entering into a new agreement, the Philippines just enter into an executive agreement with the United States to facilitate everything? Because the current treatment right now is we treat this as a treaty. That's why Senate concurrence is needed. VFA is treated by the United States as an executive agreement. I have here the one-page transmittal of former President Bill Clinton. Pursuant to subsection B of the Kay-Zablocki Act, I hereby transmit a report prepared by the Department of State concerning international agreements, addressed to the Speaker. So will that be part of your, I'm not giving you some insights that will probably be against the sentiments of the members of the Senate, but will that be part of your report or review, that we just go into an executive agreement?
Mr. Chair.
It's a very
Mr.
leading
Senator.
question.
Yes,
Yusek.
it's actually part of our review, and a number of decisions by the Supreme Court likewise inform us of how to proceed with this particular question. But as we have previously stated, we are still finalizing that report to be submitted to the Office of the President.
Chairman, I think forever this issue of presidential prerogative in foreign policy, or even for that matter, declaration of war, if you look at the whole history of the United States, which has always been at war, even Truman did not go to Congress to ask for a declaration of war against Korea. He termed it, in a very good legalese, if you will, termed it as a police action done with the United Nations. So in the same manner, previous presidents before him, even Wilson, tried to stay away from World War I, or for that matter, FDR, tried to stay away as long as he can, because going to Congress would later on, as thought by the executive, would say that is going to impinge or impugn the president's capability to be independent and be able to judge the system as it goes. Thank you.
Undersecretary Malaya, you are the Undersecretary for Treaties? Yes.
I'm the Undersecretary for Administration, but I used to
Used to head
the assistant
Assistant
Office
Secretary for
of Treaties and
so,
Legal Affairs.
As far as you know, does the DFA as an institution already have a position on whether or not Senate concurrence is needed in withdrawal from treaties? Meron na ba kayong position dyan? Wala pa?
There are inter-office and inter-agency discussions ongoing, but
so can we ask for a position paper? Can you help guide this committee, or just give us your inputs on the resolution by furnishing us with the position paper?
Yes, Your
And
Honor.
may I point out to the Undersecretary and to those who will study the issue that the wording of the need for Senate concurrence or the Senate concurrence in treaty making in the U.S. Constitution is different from the wording in the Philippine Constitution. Now, in the difference in phraseology, is there an effect? Ang gusto kong sabihin, US law, US jurisdiction may not automatically be applicable to the Philippines because the wording is not exactly the same.
That is correct.
So just please pay attention to
and we'll study it very carefully, Mr. Chairman.
to the difference in phraseology. Meron pong ipagkaibahan. Okay.
Yeah, I will work with the Assistant Secretary of OTLA, Mr. Igor Bailan, who is at the back.
Anybody else who wants to comment on any of the 5 resolutions pending in our hearing? Okay. Then because kung wala na, we will suspend and then go to executive session. But Senator Tolentino?
Last question to supplement the previous question of the chair. Is there a body that reviews, similar to VFA, our visiting forces agreement with Australia? Or is it covered by the same body? The same. USEC. So all visiting forces agreements falls under?
Yes.
Yes, because notably the only difference that we can take note of that is the environmental concern with the Australian VFA, if I'm not mistaken. So probably that's part of your review.
Okay, so anything else? Okay na, we will. So we will suspend our hearing and we will resume inside the Senator's Lounge in 5 minutes. Siguro, just continue, finish your lunch. And we are inviting, sino gusto mo? To join us in executive session, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs and his 2 undersecretaries present with him now, the Secretary of Defense, Yusek Yano, and the Chief of Staff, as well as the commanders of the different services, our National Security Advisor, Secretary Esperon, and then, of course, Yusek Rambuanga. Okay, that should be... DOJ, hindi na siguro. Okay, so all of those persons, in 5 minutes, we will just fix our room, the room that we will use. So our hearing in the meantime is hereby suspended.